Hi everyone, today we are going to get into our last section of HTML before we move on to the CSS language for web design. We're going to talk about forms in HTML. And before we start our notes, I just want you to think about for a second what websites would be like if there was no way for the user to interact. So here I am at the YouTube screen. What if I couldn't actually search for something? I could only click on the links that already existed. What if I was at Amazon's website and I wanted to search for something, but there was no search box and I just had to browse my way through categories? That could be pretty frustrating. Same thing with Google. There would be no Google. And even if you were signing up for an account, so for example here I have the page to set up for a new email account through Microsoft, and I have to put in my name and username and choose a password and put in my date of birth and select the gender, all those different things. Without forms you wouldn't be able to do this in HTML. So I'm going to take you to our notes for today, forms in HTML. First thing is what forms are used for, and that is allowing someone who views your page to interact with the author. So there are lots of different ways that we see forms in HTML, and I'm just going to have you list a few examples. Surveys would be one. Order forms. Registration forms, similar to what I had on the Microsoft screen. Feedback forms. And so on. And again, probably the biggest way that we use forms is to do a search or a query on a website like Google or Amazon or many other sites as well. Okay, so if we decide that we want to add this to a web page, first thing we're going to have to do is add the correct tag. So what I'm going to have you put in your notes now is going to be a little different. We're going to modify it a bit, but for today this is how we're going to do it. Okay, so you'll see the command that I have listed here. If we want to put a form into a web page, we use the form tag, but unfortunately it's not just form as is. We have to have multiple attributes to this. So form tells the browser what we're adding. Method, this attribute is telling the browser what to do with the data. In this case, it's telling the browser to post it. We put that in quotation marks. Action, oh, I see I lost my exclamation points when I was working with this. Action is telling the browser where the data should be sent to. And this is the one that I want you to put in your notes for now, but we are going to be changing that. And I'll explain that in a little while. And what I also added up here is that when the form is complete, you do need to include a closing form tag. Okay, so that's how we get it started. But if we did that in a web page, it's still going to get us nowhere. You have to actually put in different types of input. Again, this is going to be something that we're going to add to. I'm starting you with the most simple ones today, so our notes are not going to be complete today. The most common type of form input is the text box. text box is going to provide just a long white box, well, not necessarily long, for entering data. And I'm going to show you how to put that in a little bit. Another type of input that you can have on a form is called a text area box. This would be if you had a user that you wanted to be able to enter large amounts of text. You'll notice that I added to the notes. It's a large box for typing many words. Can include scroll buttons. So if you had anything that required someone to enter a paragraph or multiple sentences, this is the type that you would want to include. Another really common one that we use is called radio buttons. You'll notice for the notes, I've added that it allows the user to select one choice from a limited number of options. So what makes radio buttons unique from the other types of form input is that you do make it where the user can only select one. So if it was a question, yes or no, that would be an excellent choice for radio buttons. Gender is another one. It's just going to be one or the other. So radio buttons are the perfect way to do that. Sometimes, however, though, you have some input where maybe the user wants to be able to select more than one option. That would be the use of a text box in an HTML form. And let me just fix my font. There we go. So the checkbox allows the user to select more than one choice from a list of options. If I had a question that said, which school activities are you currently involved with? And maybe you're in band, maybe you're in a sport, maybe you're in Science Olympiad. You don't want to be limited to only choose one of them. You want to be able to choose more than one. That's where the checkbox comes in. Another one that we can use is a drop-down menu. And you'll notice that I have listed here that a drop-down menu allows the user to select one option from the drop-down list when clicking on it. This would be perfect if you had to choose what state you live in, and you could have a drop-down list and all the states are listed and you just choose Michigan. Or what county do you live in, and you have Sheboygan, Emmett, Mackinac, Charlevoix, Otsego, and you can click on the drop-down list and then choose which one you want. Okay, another one that we could use is called a scroll box. I personally don't use this very much. It's basically the same thing as a drop-down menu. The only difference is that it will actually appear in a scroll box, and the user can scroll up and down and then click on the option. Okay, and then, like I said, I am going to be having you add some more types of input that have been added to HTML in recent years, but I'm going to finish up with just two other ones for today, and that is how you're actually going to submit the information. So we have a submit button. If we set that submit button in a page, then it's going to let the user send the data from the form and send it to the page author. This is one that theoretically works this way, but the way we have it set up, it truly won't work at this point. But I'm keeping it simple. We'll make it a little more complicated further on down the road. The other option for a button that you can add is a reset button. The reset button will just clear anything that had been filled in on the screen. So those are the different types. Now I'm going to go through the commands that you use to put them in. Obviously, you already know the form tag is how we start it with a closing form tag at the end, but we need to actually get this input on the screen. So first I'm going to show you how to add a text box. Okay, so the tag that we use here is an input tag, and this is what we're going to use for most of the ways of putting things on an HTML form. We're going to do input, type equals, and then in quotation marks the name of the input, which in this case is text. That's for your text box. Name equals, and then what would we put in quotation marks there would be a description of what this text box should contain. And then size equals with a number, and then that number is just going to represent the number of characters. A good size to include is probably 30. Depends on exactly what you're asking someone to input, but I will show you what a size 30 looks like in just a little bit. That's how you do a text box. Notice there is no closing input tag. Okay, then I'm going to show you how to do a text area box. And it just requires a text area tag. So this one's not going to use the input tag. We're going to do text area, name equals, we're going to put a description in there of what the text area box is looking to include, and then we can add some other attributes of rows and calls. And that would indicate the size that you're trying to determine, how many rows it is and how many columns wide it is. And then this one actually does require a closing tag, so closing text area tag right after that. Again, the text area box is when you're trying to allow your users to enter a large amount of text. Okay, so if you remember, one of the things I mentioned earlier was a radio button, which lets someone select one choice out of a limited number of options. This is how we do a radio button. We're back to the input tag. Type equals radio. Name equals, and then in quotation marks, we're going to give the name of the category of choices. And then we're adding a new attribute, which is value. And what's going to go after value will be a description of what the option is. Okay, so when we're doing radio buttons, the one thing you'll have to keep in mind is that you would need to repeat this command, change the value obviously, but for as many options as you're allowing. The other thing to keep in mind, and this is something that sometimes I forget, I have to go back and put it in, but you're also going to have to type the text outside of the tag so that the user doesn't just see a radio button with nothing next to it. Understand that when you're doing the name and the value attributes, those are internal attributes. They're not going to display on the page. They're there so that the input buttons will work correctly. They're also there for anyone with visual impairments. Or other type of impairments where they're using some sort of accessibility software or hardware to help them navigate your page. Okay, so that's the radio buttons, and then remember you can also have a checkbox which lets someone choose more than one option. So I'm going to show you how to do that really quickly. You'll notice I'm still doing the input tag. Type equals checkbox, no spaces, that's all one word. Name equals, just like the other ones, and in quotation marks we're going to choose a category. We're still going to use that value attribute also. And again, you'll need to repeat this tag for as many options as you have, and just keep in mind, like I said, for the radio buttons, you want to make sure you remember to place the text that you want to show up next to that box outside of the tag. Otherwise, you'll have just a check box and nothing next to it. The user won't know what it's supposed to represent. Okay, I'm going to show you how to do a drop-down menu. This one's going to use a different tag. This is going to use the select command. We're going to use the name attribute with this as well, and in quotation marks, the category of what we're asking for. Okay, so you'll see that what we have here after the select tag are some option tags, and the first one that you'll see is option selected. That's the default choice. So what that means is that's the one that will appear to the user on the page. They can click on it and they can choose the other options, and you can continue to include option tags for as many options as possible, or as many options as you're trying to include. When you're all done, you do a closing select tag. And that's how you do a drop-down menu. Now, if you remember, I also mentioned up above in the notes that we have scroll boxes, which are the same thing as a drop-down menu, except that the user can scroll through inside a box. This is really easy to do. All we have to do is add something to the select tag. I'm having some formatting issues. Okay, so all we have to do is add to the select tag for the drop-down menu. We would add size equals, and we would put in a number. That number is going to represent the number of options that will be visible at a time. And you can see my example here. I have a select tag, name equals age group, that would be my category, size equals 4. So whatever options that I would have in this particular input, it would show 4 of them all at one time. If there were more options, then it would show some scroll bars and the user could navigate. Okay, so I have 2 things left for you for today, and that is taking care of those buttons. So if we want to add a submit button, we're back to using the input tag. We do input, type equals submit. And we're going to add the value attribute, and inside the quotation marks would be the text that's going to appear on the button. And the last one that I'm going to show you is adding a reset button. And again, if you actually clicked on the reset button, that will clear all the input on the form. Again, we're back to using the input tag. So we have input, type equals reset, value equals text to appear on the button. Whatever we want to show up on that. Alright, so what I already have created is a sample form HTML file, and I am going to show it to you on the screen right now. I'm going to show it to you in Notepad, and then I'm going to show you what it looks like in your browser. Alright, so here's my HTML file. Up at the top, you'll see all the typical things that we include in our web page. But what I want you to focus on here is the form tag. So notice I have form, method equals post, action equals, and in quotation marks, mail to, colon. There's my email address. Theoretically, that would mean that if someone were to click the submit button, the results would actually be sent to my email address. Realistically, that's not going to work, and that's where we're going to work on it in the future. But for now, this is how we want to do it. So you'll notice I have please enter your first name with a break tag, and then I have input, type equals text, name equals, in quotes, I have first name, size equals 30. That'll give me a text box that's 30 characters wide. Then I'm going to double space with the paragraph tag, and the next thing I have is please indicate your gender. Okay, gender, you could only be male or female, so we're going to use radio buttons. So I have male on the outside of the tag, that's going to show up on the page. Input, type equals radio. Name equals gender, that's the category. Value equals male. My other option, I have female. And then again, input type equals radio. Name equals gender. Value equals female. The name is important. You keep that the same. This will make it so that the user can only select one out of the group. Okay, then I double space down and I ask what grade are you in? And when you see the select tag here, you'll notice this is a drop-down menu. So I have 9, 10, 11, and 12 for grade levels. Option selected is 9, so that's the one that's going to appear on the page. After that, I double space down. What sports do you like to watch? Check all that apply. So that's going to be a checkbox because that's the one that lets you select more than one option. I have input, type equals checkbox. Name equals sports. You'll notice that I have that listed all throughout the options. Value equals, and then I have individual choices. Outside of that tag, I also have the options listed. Baseball, basketball, football, hockey, and golf. If I didn't do that outside the tag, like I said earlier, I'm just going to end up with an empty checkbox and no clue as to what it represents. And then down here at the bottom, I have briefly describe what you want to be when you grow up. And notice I have a text area tag. So this is the one that's going to give me a box for typing in a large amount of text. Name equals, and then I put describe what you want to be when you grow up. Notice I have rows equals 20. I have calls equals 50. So that's going to indicate the dimensions of my text area box. And remember, this one does require a closing tag immediately after the text area tag. And then we get to the bottom. I have input, type equals submit. Value equals send in your responses. That's what's going to show up on the button. and then I have a reset button, value equals, clear the form and start again. And below all of that I have a closing form tag. And then of course I have my closing body in HTML. That's what the document looks like in Notepad, and now I'm going to open Microsoft Edge and let you take a look at the page. Please enter your first name. This is where I could put in a name. Please indicate your gender. Notice if I click male, and then if I try to click female, it switches from one to the other. That's how the radio buttons work. What grade are you in? Remember the default was 9th grade, but I can select a different one. What sports do you like to watch? You can choose more than one. Briefly describe what you want to be when you grow up. And you could continue. And notice I did 20 rows, 50 columns, I believe, were my dimensions, so you can see how large that box looks. Okay, then I get to the bottom. Here are the two buttons I created. Send in your responses, clear the form, and start again. Send in your responses. When you create this, I don't want you to actually try it, but I'm going to show you what happens here. Comes up, says this form is being submitted using email. Submitting this form will reveal your email address to the recipient. You may continue or cancel the submission. If I click to continue, it's going to try to open Microsoft Outlook, which is a mail program. Most people don't use this on their computer, so this is why we're going to avoid it. So I'm just going to choose no. And I'm going to show you what the clear button looks like. Clear the form and start again. And you can see it wiped out all the input. The only other thing I want to show you is I'm going to go back to Notepad. And I am going to take the drop-down menu, and I am going to change the size to 2, so that'll make 2 of them visible. And I'm going to reload it just so you can see what it looks like. This is not a type of input that I use very much, but you'll notice now, what grade are you in? I set it to 2, and notice there's scroll buttons, so I can click and scroll through if I want to. And that's how you do that. Okay, what you are required to have done is to take the notes. If you need to back up the video, feel free to do that. You need to submit your notes to me on Google Classroom, and we will go further with this tomorrow.